If you, Chris, you and I, if we were to go back and inhabit our high school brains, right? The things that we stressed about, that kept us up at night, that we tossed and turned and we thought, oh my God, I have to deal with this in life. They were so minuscule. Okay. Well, what's happened? Our capacity to handle things has grown, you know? Yeah. It's hormesis, right? It's that positive stress that grows muscle. Same thing happens physically.
Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys, the podcast of great conversations with men. I'm your host, Chris Foster, and we're going to explore how we wear this beautiful and confusing mantle of manhood in the 21st century. Look, I get it. In public life, a lot of men are knuckleheads. But in private life, we can be thoughtful and we can be reflective if we have the right conversation, if we feel comfortable talking about our story. And we all have a great story to tell. And we can all learn from those stories. We can learn about who we've been, who we are, and who we want to be. And that's why we're going to have this conversation, so we can learn from other men just like us. And today we're going to speak with Bryce Eddy. He is a very strong man. He has very strong convictions. He knows who he is. He knows who he's not. And we have a discussion about being strong and humble, being physically capable, yet also embracing failure and discomfort. It's about humility and strength. It's about, in one way, to be a man. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. Welcome in to Menfolk Journeys. Well, all right, Mr. Bryce Eddy, welcome in.
Hey, thank you for having me, Chris.
I appreciate you being here, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Listen, I had my daughter one time ask somebody like, Dad, what do we say you do for a living? And I said, listen, I'm a many-layered onion. That's all you have to say. So, I've been a entrepreneur and businessman for many years. I spent a lot of my career in the insurance business on kind of the consulting and brokerage side of things. But simultaneously, I've owned a jiu-jitsu school. I have a podcast on Salem's Network. Politics are a little bit of my sport. So I got blessed to be able to work in that world. I own a cigar lounge here in my local community. We're building a honky tonk and cowboy chop house. I sit on a number of high profile conservative political boards, and I'm a natural rabble rouser. So that's kind of my life.
I love it. Question for you. How old was your daughter when she asked you that?
I think she was like 9 years old.
Okay. So right on that age of being aware, right?
Yeah.
Because, she's getting to the place where she's talking to mom and dad. She sees what they do for a living. She sees other kids her age and their parents do other stuff. And they kind of talk about what parents do. And she's like, what do you actually do?
Yeah, I got a great story when my oldest two were in like kindergarten, first grade. It was like career day. Bring your dad to work, bring your dad to school, and kind of a thing, right? Mm-hmm. And I was sandwiched between a firefighter and a helicopter pilot, trying to explain, that what the insurance business is about, right?
Yes.
And the only way I was effective is I got a roll of dimes and I passed out all these dimes, and I talked about the kind of old school version of insurance, which really started from, the shipping companies, Lloyd's of London and things like that.
Of course.
It was all of these people that were having disasters. The merchants would lose their entire ships at sea, and it would be like, oh, bad luck on you, right? So they all got together and they're like, all right, how do we collectively take care of each other here? Because we know this is going to happen to us from time to time. And so they, pooled their money together. So I explained some of this stuff and gave them all dimes. And and, took dimes from each one of them and then, wiped out one of the other kids' fortunes. And then I took all of the dimes that I collected and gave it to them. And the kids were like, yeah. And I have to say I was brilliant because they remembered me. The helicopter pilot was cool. The firefighter was cool, but they were forgotten after I gave them dimes.
After you give them the dimes. I don't know if... Are you familiar with Nate Bargatze? He's the comedian.
Yeah.
And he did this one routine where it was bring your parent to work day. And, he said he kind of sat next to a surgeon and he was like, what are they doing? Like showing me that. And he says, this is the difference of reading. Right. And the kids ask him, he says, well, how old do you have to be? And what degrees in education do you have to be a comedian? And these are like sixth graders. And he goes, oh, you're good. Right. You're fine right now. But what's interesting about it though is, a bring parents to work day or bring dad to school day, right? It's actually a really interesting thing because whether we like it or not, I think as men we start getting comparative with one another, right? And we wonder, what's he doing? And that when you're in a classroom, those kids, maybe not without judging, they're looking at these adults in their careers or in their quote unquote adult life. They're also comparing.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Right. And so you wonder, all right, firefighter, insurance. I think you made a really cool, interesting historical thing about insurance, firefighter, helicopter pilot. But did you feel like you had to show and do something to make insurance seem interesting compared to these other folks?
Well, to a certain extent. I mean, listen, I was, at that time I was, kicking butt and making great money. So I was like, I make more of that helicopter pilot. I make more of the firefighter. I mean, listen, the firefighters, I mean, they get to play no friendo and pickleball and things like that, which is pretty cool. And they get a 4-day break from the families. But other than that, I was doing well, but I thought, wow, okay, how do you make this interesting? Because some of the, best jobs on the planet aren't particularly interesting. The nice thing about what I do in the insurance business, honestly, is that we get to see so many ways that people make money. That's probably the best thing that I've done. And nobody, just for the record, for the audience, chooses the insurance business. Oh, my dad was in it. My uncle was in it. In my case, it was the second pew in from the front of our church. Good looking guy, charismatic, had a beautiful wife, nice looking kids, and drove a good car. And I was a little unmoored teenager. And I'm like, what does he do? So I went to work for him in the summer and then ended up falling into that business. It's not something that is like, oh yeah, that's high on my list,
and as a kid, you have no idea what that
engineers,
means.
Whatever, people, right? But I had this other really funny revelation one time because I'm a super restless guy, and which is why I make a lot of my hobbies into businesses, and I end up doing so many things. I'm a little bit unstoppable in that regard, and I've had a colorful and fruitful life as a result. But I realized one time in regards to the insurance business, every time I, felt like, this, is boring to me, whatever. I'm, selling and, brokering insurance and consulting, I'd rather get shot at or something like that. And I realized that every job on the planet becomes work at some point. Okay. Every job has stress. Everything that you do, has times in which you're like, I got to get up and go and do that. There's distasteful portions of everything that you do. That's why it's called work. It's why it's called work and not play. Right.
Sure.
I'm going to tell a slightly off color story, but I'm going to try to clean it up, make it PG. I was a jujitsu guy, now going on 30 years. Right.
Wow.
And there was a guy on the mat that was an adult movie performer. And and I remember him talking with like, I got to go and do this today. And as a, young 20-something-year-old, even being a Christian and all that stuff at the time, you're like, wow, okay, if he is going, I got to go and perform. You know, you're like, all right, everything at some point becomes work. Everything at some point
everything
sucks.
is work.
You know,
Right,
everything
right.
at some point you're like, I don't want to get up for that. You know,
Totally.
which is amusing, right?
It is amusing. And I think that, you know, to go on that thread a little bit more, I think that's why I think, and this isn't a theory I can prove, right? I can't prove this theory, but I think that's why some young men get challenged by committing or jumping in to some type of profession, right? Because they're afraid of the boredom, or they're afraid that it can be deadening. And, you know, I loved your example of seeing a model of somebody at church and ask, well, what do they do? How did you, guy, get to be you? And because I kind of want to be kind of like you. What did you do? Oh, you did insurance? Sure, I'll try insurance. But yeah. I think that for you, you were like, yeah, let's just try this and move into it. Where sometimes, like you said, you don't choose insurance, you just fall into it. And then suddenly, if you're interested enough or you're curious enough, almost any job can be kind of interesting, right? Because you figure out nuances and the like.
I agree. And just, you know, a little pause there, and I apologize for interrupting, but you know, it was that he was a leader among men. I noticed he was charismatic, right? So in addition to, you know, there was an attraction to like this dude, you know, he was jacked. He, you know, always wore, you know, nice clothing to church, you know, looked well put together. The whole family did, you know, people, you know, moved around him. You know, it was like this, you know, he had people orbiting, you know, he drew people in, you know, so there was something about that I was like, you know what, I don't know what I'm going to do in life, but okay, I'd like to be like that. And then, you know, I got to know him, and he was one of my mentors for 10 plus years.
Yeah. But you know what? I think I want to probe on that a little bit, Bryce, because I think that's such an important thing for young boys and young men to find what they would consider to be a model of manhood of some kind. Right. Because, you know, way back in the Wayback Machine, we had apprentices, right? So if you were a cobbler's apprentice or a blacksmith apprentice,
that's right.
You know, you were 12 years old and you're like, okay, you're working with me, and you're like, gink, 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 you know, working it out. But you're looking at the master cobbler and saying, oh my gosh, he's a master. This person knows what they're doing. And then you start looking at that person living. Oh, he can provide for a family. He's got children. He's got this thing, right? He's got a life that he's living. And I kind of want to look at that model and see. But that's what happened to you and with this man, that you sought out a model of manhood. I think that we don't realize how important that is for young boys and men.
And I think that we don't have that many examples of that right now. You know, I think there has been a great number of lies told to young men, right? And you know, many of which, I mean, young men for sure, but young people also. And some of those lies have been things like, hey, you know, you need to get this degree, come to college, you need to go to college, all that sort of stuff. Some of the best jobs on earth have nothing to do with any formal degrees, right? You talked about the learning model of, you know, apprentice, journeyman, you know, to master kind of a thing. And the trades right now are missing good, talented people. I've got a buddy who's
trades need. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a buddy who started out as a lowly electrician. You know, grew up incredibly poor and in bad circumstances and rough bad circumstances, and you know, became an electrician, you know, started with a, you know, small little business, and now he's a billionaire, and he's buying up all the other companies, and he's got a, you know, incredible, you know, operational talent, and people want to work for this guy, and he sets a tone that everybody wants to be part of his team, you know, and
he's learning as a result, how to be that man. Yeah.
You know, as a result, he's absolutely crushing it. And he, you know, didn't graduate from Yale. I mean,
exactly.
But we've been sold that lie. I told you before we began, I was on Charlie Kirk's board, who was assassinated this last week, and it's a political assassination.
I'm really sorry for your loss.
No. Thank you for that. And yeah, still processing it all. But Charlie, wrote a book about the college scam. And there's a number of reasons why they, pushed these kids down that particular path and ignored the actual practical things that make this world run. And we need what he called the muscular class. And so many of the best opportunities right now are found by people who are willing to do whatever job. And a lot of these kids are being told, okay, go to college, do this. They're being given this designer degree opportunity. They're coming out of these schools and then they're imagining that they should be CEOs very quickly. And then the real world's hitting them and they end up failing and they end up being, bitter and working as baristas in Starbucks. And the truth is that we need to look at these things differently. And Charlie was a great example of that. And I think communicated that super well. But everything needs to be, and this is biblical. I'm a preacher's kid, so I have to say some of these things. But everything is basically, whatever God gives you to put your hand to, work mightily at it, right? Sow in the morning, sow in the evening. You don't know what's going to bear fruit. And what happens is with kids and young men, you parlay one success into the other. And half the time the battle is won by just showing up.
Absolutely. And I also think too, that there's more, there are more options now, Bryce, than ever before for this generation. And what's interesting is that, as young kids start moving up and getting a little bit older, there could be, oh my gosh, there's such a pessimism about the future, right? And do I have to go to college? Maybe I'm not a college guy. Maybe I'm not a tradesperson. Where do I fit? The beautiful thing about this time, though, right now, is that the technology has made it possible for multiple paths, right? For people who do want to go to college and get an advanced degree, you can. People who have an entrepreneurial spirit and want to jump into marketing or jump into business, they can. You can, with a couple $1,000s and an idea, get a website, start selling product. And if you have a hustler's mindset, if you have a business acumen, if you understand how behavior works, college isn't necessary for you to start actually fulfilling on a career path. And then, of course, with the trades, we are in desperate need of good tradespeople moving into the world, because we always need tradespeople in our functioning society. And so I think that, it used to be a debate where you have to go to college because look at because of the income disparity. Some of the studies that they're showing now, though, is because college has become so expensive and has become saddling students with debt. You actually don't have the wealth factor increase if you go to college.
You do not.
And so there's, I think that where we start getting into these interesting times of history is that the pendulums do swing, right? Right after World War II, the GI Bill was popular, and you had a lot of, working class folks coming back from the war, going to college, which was awesome. And they were getting higher education, which was great. And that was a really interesting storyline for this whole swath of generation, which was needed at the time. But maybe it's not as needed as much, right? And that the needs of one generation don't necessarily assume the needs of the next generation.
Yeah, and I'm obviously not. I'm obviously not wholesale opposed to college. I just think you need a reason. And you need a focus, and you need something that is at the end of that thing. And there are ways to, avoid the massive debt that might go along with it. But if you're just going to go and get some liberal arts meaningless degree because you don't know where you're going or what you're going to do with it, it's useless. You're going to end up working at Starbucks or in a job that doesn't require a degree, and then you're going to be bitter and you'll turn left wing and cultivate ugliness.
Well, and I think the idea of the bitterness is the thing that you want to avoid. I think that the older I get, one of the things that I see lacking in our broad education system, and this starts in kindergarten, elementary school, this starts in the home in terms of conversations, is the idea of purpose. and I'm a little bit guilty of this too, right? So I grew up in an environment where my entire family went to, I mean, everybody goes to college. It's not a question of if you're going to college, it's where, right?
Right.
And there was to be honest with you, there's a little bit of an expectation that the college I would go to would be a significant college, right?
Right.
And I went, and it was interesting because I'm a curious person, and I wanted to soak up a lot of stuff and learn a lot of things, and I'm interested in many, 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 many ideas. But I didn't go with real purpose. I had to find my purpose a little bit later, and it would have benefited me had I put a pause and said, you know what, I'm gonna be more intentional about my purpose before I go. But that time, I mean, you're talking what, late 80s, 90s, right? Moving in, there was a track that was kind of laid down. And I look back on my younger self, Bryce, and I wasn't as strong about who I wanted to be in a real purposeful way. I kind of knew who I wanted, what I wanted to learn, but I didn't know who I wanted to necessarily be. And it gets back to what we talked about earlier as kind of this model of manhood. So my folks split when I was 5. And so I lived with my mom, and I saw my dad every other weekend, and he was a doctor. He was a psychiatrist, and he ran the drug and alcohol unit in a town called Butler, Pennsylvania, in Butler Memorial Hospital. And so, Bryce, this, just to put context,
Trump was nearly assassinated there.
Exactly. So this was in the 80s, and in the 80s, the steel industry collapsed in Western Pennsylvania. So he ran the drug and alcohol unit, so he knew everyone in town.
Yeah.
Everyone in town either knew him or knew someone who was being seen by Dr. Foster or was on the way. So they all knew him, right? And we would walk around, and I was kind of looking at him like, wow, is this my model of manhood? Is this who I should be? Then there were other men that I saw, and I'm like, is that who I should be? Right. So I was trying to figure out, because he wasn't in my life every single day, I didn't quite get the daily osmosis of a model of manhood. When you were growing up, did you see kind of this daily model of manhood or daily model of fatherhood that helped guide you in terms of the man you wanted to be?
That's a great question. So, my parents were also divorced. Now, my parents had a unique story because my dad was a pastor, and my dad died this year unexpectedly. We did not expect that. I mean, he was a very vibrant, very strong guy, very fit, but he had polio when he was 2 years old. And he walked on crutches most of my life. And then in the last 10 years, because of a shoulder injury, he was in a, fast wheelchair, but he knew how to move that thing around. And he was, you would not have, I mean, he was one of the most charming, one of the most engaging. He was a professional speaker, did voiceover work. He was a master of ceremonies for Brian Buffini, who's a real estate trainer. He did that for 20 years. I mean, my dad was on stages. My dad was just a really dynamic and amazing guy, and worked out and fit all that stuff. But when you're paraplegic and you only have 50% of your body working, that puts a lot of strain on your circulatory system and things like that. So he had some underlying heart things, but my dad was one that avoided the doctor and all that stuff. He lived a healthy and clean life, but they never expected him to live even half as long as he did, given that condition. So he died just shy of 75 years old, and it was a tremendous shock for us. But my dad was an amazing guy in many respects, but that marriage broke early, and then my parents ended up getting together another time, divorcing after 1 year when I was 19, then getting back together when I was 26, yes. And then remained together until my mom's death about 5 or 6 years ago. Okay. And so because of that, my dad was not my mentor. My dad was not someone that I
Interesting.
looked up to because, my joke is that I was raised by wolves, which, has its own, complications and family of origin issues on me and things like that. Now, I was blessed, though, to have guys like my best friend's dad, or guys like the insurance leader that I ended up going to work for. And I was continuously looking for mentors, looking for examples of those sort of things. And I don't think that you should, as a young man, look for one example, because, there are people in your life that do things well. There's people in your life that do, do things poorly. There's people who have, strengths, right? And if you see those strengths, you want to emulate the strengths and be a collector of those things. And oh, by the way, you should be doing that in friendships. The friends that you pick should be picked because they have some unique trait or something that's inspiring to you. Maybe this guy is just has an incredible work ethic and is brilliant about these things. Or maybe this guy, the way he, maintains his physical fitness is amazing. Okay, this guy I like because of the way that he communicates and the way he's bold and all this stuff. And these can be people that are 100% in your life and you have a direct relationship. They can be like guys like Charlie Kirk, who I think his impact is going to be tremendous for the coming years, because he affected many young men who are graduating high school right now, that are trending to be more conservative than any other time in history. And it's because of them seeing him and listening to him and developing ideas. Well, I think we have to collect those people. We have to collect inspiring friends, and we have to collect inspiring mentors. And so I really have been blessed, because I knew that maybe intuitively, and just found people that I was attracted to for all of those various reasons.
For different reasons. And I think that that's such an interesting way to think about things, especially when you're younger, because you're right. We are all complex people. We all get inspired by different things. And we can be inspired by contradictory things, by contradictory people, and learn from contradictory people as well. And I think that's healthy. I think that's good. I think that the idea of seeking out a variety of different men as models, so that you can learn about what about them do you admire, so that actually teaches you more about yourself, right? And what's important to you.
Yeah, that by the way is why biographies are amazing. Read books about great men, right? Because you're going to, in those books, I mean, most of them will include their foibles. Most of them will include the missteps that they made, right? But you will end up coming away with things that, okay, will inspire you because of some of the things that they did, but also encourage you that their lives were not perfect. Their
lives were not perfect, right? And I think that's really important to know that. Of course, we're humans, so none of us are perfect. But when you read about other men, I think it's also interesting, yes, to read about their foibles and their mistakes, but also realize that their achievements are not out of reach for us.
Yes.
Right? They're just people that actually did things. And so one of the questions is, well, if other people are able to do things, aren't I able to do something too? Right? I am a natural. We've known each other for now 26 minutes, but I think you can
We're
tell.
fast friends, though.
Exactly. Of course. I think you can tell something about me, that I'm naturally optimistic.
Sure.
I am.
Yeah. I'm picking that up.
Optimistic. I'm naturally enthusiastic. I have a lot of hope for what we could be, especially this next generation I'm really excited about. But what I think is so interesting when you start reading biographies of different men is to figure out, all right, they might be smarter. They might have different tools and talents, right? Which is fine. But then what can I do with what I have? Right? What can I do in terms of the dreams that I have, the capabilities that I have? What's the best that I can do, and what is the best achievements that I can reach. And if other people have done it, why can't I do it?
That's right.
Right?
Listen, there's this great movie. All right. Great is probably not the right. It's a good movie, but it's got a couple of things that are worth it.
All right,
because
you got to start ranking. I get you.
Yeah. But it's a David Mamet movie. He wrote it, and it was called The Edge. Alec Baldwin, and Hannibal Lecter. Listen, anyway, it'll come to me.
I know Anthony Hopkins.
Anthony Hopkins. Thank you. Yeah, I had a crazy brain fart there. But Alec Baldwin, Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins is a billionaire. Alec Baldwin is a photographer. Anthony Hopkins and his model wife and this photographer go to this place in Alaska. They're going to do a photo shoot. Anthony Hopkins, billionaire, is kind of along for the ride. His wife's a famous model. Turns out that Anthony, his wife, played by Elle Macpherson, and Alec Baldwin are having an affair. Naturally. And things sort of devolve. They end up, going on this journey, get hit by a bird strike, crash land in the wilderness. It's just Alec Baldwin and Anthony Hopkins trying to survive against this bear that is hunting them down. And Alec Baldwin, who resents the hell out of Anthony Hopkins because he's a billionaire and he's got this model wife and, all this sort of stuff. And there's these scenes in it where Anthony Hopkins is resourceful. And Alec Baldwin is like, yelling at him, "You billionaires, you think this, you think it right." And he's excoriating him. But he's jealous and he's envious and he's seeing that this guy is resourceful and he's falling apart because this bear is going after them. And Anthony Hopkins at one time, who had read these books on survival, beautiful little cat there, is reading these books on survival, and he tells him, "We can kill this bear." And Alec Baldwin is despairing and he says, "What one man can do, another can do. I'm going to kill a bear. Say it. What one man can do, another can do. Say it. I'm going to kill the bear." And it's this moment in this thing.
I love it.
Yeah, where then Alec Baldwin is like, "I'm going to kill the bear," and they end up killing this bear. Bart the bear was the actor. God rest his soul. He played in a lot of things. Big Kodiak bear that they had for this, and some of these things in the movie were impressive, but. It was one of those moments. I was in a dark time in my life, and I remember thinking, well, one man can do, another can do. I'm going to kill the bear. Right. And that's been a kind of a lifelong mantra when I've gotten into these situations where I'm like, wow, defeated. And there's an interesting thing about stress. And I don't know, the demographics of your show or who's listening to it, but if you, Chris, you and I, if we were to go back and inhabit our high school brains, right? The things that we stressed about, that kept us up at night, that we tossed and turned and we thought, oh my God, I can't believe I have to deal with this in life. They were so minuscule. Okay. Well, what's happened? Our capacity to handle things has grown.
I was just going to say that. It's about capacity.
Yeah. It's hormesis. Right? Yeah, it's that positive stress that grows muscle.
That's right.
Same thing happens physically.
And it happens. It happens also. Call it your soul, call it your energy, call it whatever you want. You get stronger. So I was talking to a mentor, one of my professional mentors, where I just had I had my second child, and I'm hustling. I'm like, we said, okay, we're gonna. My wife was like, hey, she was working full time, and she was like, hey, this, we've got the second child, she's awesome and it's wonderful, but I can't work full time and be the primary raiser of two kids and blah, blah, blah. You're really going to have to make this happen. So I was like, okay, let's go. Right. And, my stress level went to the roof, right? Because I'm like, okay, this is San Diego, family of 4, single income. Let's do this. And I was talking to my mentor about this, and he said, look, you're your capacity to handle more just increases as you get older. And so as I
Sure.
learned, I had these conversations with my daughter when they were teenagers. And I said, well, it's kind of like, because she was going through stuff like all kids are. And I said, you're actually lobstering. And she's like, what? I said, well, think of a lobster. A lobster has this shell and it starts to grow, and suddenly it's super uncomfortable because it's hitting the edges of its shell, and it has to molt it. It has to eject the shell. And then when it does, it's extraordinarily vulnerable. So it has to crawl under a rock and it has to grow a new shell. But what happens when it grows a new shell? And she's like, I was like, no, what happens? And she goes, it's bigger. I said, yes, the lobster's bigger. You grow. That's what happens. You're uncomfortable and you grow. One of the guys that I really like, I've never met him, I'd love to meet him, is Mike Tomlin. He's the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he talks about is, he goes, I want to seek discomfort. I want to move towards places where I'm uncomfortable, because that's where I grow and that's where my capacity grows.
we have a saying in the jiu-jitsu and kind of fighting world, and it's become comfortable with the uncomfortable.
I love it.
And I'll talk about jiu-jitsu for a moment.
I do. I want to ask you about that. So this is a perfect transition. Jump in.
Yeah. So when I first get a student, there's a couple of things that I say. So first, I tell people, they'll, hey, and I just sold my jiu-jitsu school because it was in California, and one of the guys I mentored up to take it over is taking it over, and he's doing a great job.
Awesome.
But when I would take calls or I would talk to people, encouraging them to, embark on that journey, get on that path, get on the path, as Jocko would say. I would tell them, hey, I don't teach self-defense, right? And I would even say that for the moms that were calling and go, oh yeah, I want to, have my kid come and, learn self-defense. I said, I don't teach self-defense. I teach people to fight. And when you can fight, and you are dangerous, like Jordan Peterson says, you can have it under voluntary control. And certainly if you can fight, you can defend yourself, right? But correct. I don't teach self-defense. I don't like the psychology of even thinking that way. The other thing that I would say is,
can you hold on 1 second? Because sure. I think that is such an interesting phrase, where you teach people to fight. And it doesn't mean that you beat people up.
Correct.
What it means is that you fight for yourself, you fight for your mind, you fight for your soul, you fight for you.
Yeah, I mean, look, we want to and should be dangerous. I mean, especially for men. Men should be dangerous and have it under voluntary control. And that Jordan Peterson expressed so beautifully, and he's not a fighter, but, right. he understood that principle. And you need to be someone who's capable. You need to be someone who can handle business. You want to work hard to be someone where, people in an emergency situation, even the liberals will look at you and go, okay, what now, boss? You want to be that guy, right? Mm-hmm. And the only way you become that guy is by training. And that might be, being the person that knows how to take care of things on a survival basis, and knows how to fix things, and knows how to, like, when the chips are down, I can, change a tire, right? We've
right.
lost so much of that in our culture. Right. And most of these dudes that are coming up right now are effeminate and ineffectual. And you do not want to be that person. So
how did you get interested in jiu-jitsu? Like you said, you've been doing it for 30 years. So you started when you were 12, obviously.
Yeah, well, I'll tell people the truth. I'm 51 now. And I started, it was 1993 that you had the UFC. So I did a lot of other martial arts growing up. I was a wrestler in high school. Okay. So combat sports and
wrestling is
and
tight,
things like
right?
that.
Wrestling is you're together, you're alone, you're grappling, you're in it.
I told you my dad had polio, right? So my dad did not have use of his legs, but as kids, we would wrestle him. He would take his braces
mm-hmm.
off. He'd be on the floor and he'd wrestle us. And so, that was my love language, physicality,
sure.
Things like that was important to me, right? So I was always into that. And man, I heard from, I think it was my youth pastor in, just right out of high school, was like, oh man, I saw this thing. And he was a martial artist of like more of the karate Japanese perspective. There was this guy, and he would just wrap these dudes up and choke them out like he was an anaconda snake, and he's from Brazil, and wow, what's going on? That was 1993.
Okay.
So just a couple of years later, I went through a breakup in a relationship, and I was always in the gym, and I was past wrestling at that time. I was, out of high school, but I mean, there's only so much weights that you can eat in the gym, right? And I'm like, man,
Right.
I got to get some angst out.
Right.
And so I had heard through some friends that, there's this place called, Machado around the corner, which were cousins to the Gracie family. They all grew up together. They called themselves Gracie Jiu-Jitsu until Jorge and Gracie sued them and are like, that's our last name, not yours. I mean, it's kind of a dick move, but they ended up, those two families were kind of rivals coming up, and the five Machado brothers were, I think, in some respects better, not to take away from the Gracies. I mean, Hoist Gracie and I are friends. I got his telephone number, got some great pictures of he and I. He's, wonderful dude. We're pals. And a lot of those rivalries have dissipated as everybody's gotten sober, older, and more mature, right?
Right.
They've all calmed their stuff down. But I went, and my first day going into this place that I heard about, it was the one and only time that they had King of the Hill takedown. And everybody lined up, all the students, and I lined up for that, and I took everybody down because I was a good wrestler. Jiu-jitsu at that time was not known, and there wasn't that many like wrestlers in it. And so I took everybody down, including Jean-Jacques Machado, boom, in a big double leg, until another wrestler who was 210 pounds. I was like, 180 at the time. and this dude was a Division I guy. I was just a high school wrestler. He took me down. But otherwise, I was like, this is no problem. I got this thing. The next day I showed up because I'm like, I'm doing this.
Right.
And these dudes treated me, now we're on the ground, these guys treated me like I was a child, like I was a toddler wrestling with their uncle. And I was just blown away. And I walked out of there, and my arms, I couldn't unbend my arms. I'd been armbarred so many times. I've been choked so many times. We're in these restrictive gi uniform. And what is this BS, right? I mean, it was miserable. Jocko Willink, who started the same year that I did and the same month, said it really, really well. He goes, there's two kinds of people that experience jiu-jitsu. The kind of guy that walks in, gets absolutely owned like that, and came in with this fiction in their mind, like, I can handle business. I got this. I'm like a race car in the red. If you give me, I got this whole nother gear, and I'll just destroy you. I'll tear your head off, man. I mean, I'm a dangerous weapon, and they go in there, and they are so humbled to the point that it creates a cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And they walk out of there, and they'd rather keep the fiction that they can handle business, and they never come back. Right. And then there's the guy, and praise God, I was the guy that went, wow, I got to learn this. It's a superpower.
You get humbled too. But see, here's what's awesome about that. What I know more about you. What I know more about you is that you are comfortable being humbled. Right? There's a thing where it takes a certain kind of man to accept humility with grace and courage, right? And to understand that there's more to learn, not only in the world, but also more to learn about yourself. I have one of the episodes is with my friend Eric. It's an epic episode. It's 2 hours long. And he started jiu-jitsu late in life. He didn't start until he was about 50. And we call him, in our friend group, we call him Titanium. Like, before he started jiu-jitsu, he was Titanium. He was also pound for pound the strongest Ursling. He just was. He was just it. Like, he's the guy that decided to do marathons, and then 2 years later he's running in Boston. He's the guy who said,
I love those guys. I also hate them at the same time.
I'm going to run like with a rice, with a 20-pound sack of rice. I'm gonna make these sandals that were like the Roman style sandals, and I'm gonna run in those, right? Because all this stuff, like
I know
totally
guys like that.
right. And
Yeah.
so he started jujitsu, and he goes, "Oh man," we were like, "What was it like?" He goes, "Oh man, I got my ass kicked." I was like, "Okay." He goes, "Yeah, it's awesome. I'm going back this week." Right. And it was like, okay, I'm now programming myself to be humbled.
Yeah.
I know I'm going in and I'm going to be humbled. We'll be right back. So, Bryce, what does that teach you about you?
Well, it's interesting, man. I think that we can teach that to our kids. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of parents these days don't teach that to their kids, right? Dennis Prager, who I was close to him and his organization and served on their advisory board and they had their company party in my backyard when they couldn't have parties anywhere during COVID in California. And Dennis says this, and I think it's really encouraging to parents. Do not praise them for their like innate things and their brain power and things like that. Praise them for the effort and the things that go into stuff, right? Oh, wow, you got A's, you got straight A's, all this stuff. Wow, you must have done a lot of work to get there. You must have this. Not you're so smart, you're so this, you're so that. Because what that does is that freezes development. Because then that causes kids this thing where they are afraid to fail. And humility comes from failing. Humility comes from getting your butt kicked and then, pushing forward. And I had that in my brain was like, well, I do not have a choice. I cannot be this guy who cannot hang. I have to learn this, right?
That's awesome.
And I was willing to get my ass kicked, and I did. And jiu-jitsu is one of those things, and I say this to students. I go, give me 1 year, I will give you a superpower. 1 year of dedicated effort. If you apply yourself and you're there 3, 4 days, 5 days a week, you will end up getting your blue belt. And that means competency. Blue belt is the first level of competency. And that means that you can probably handle yourself with the average human being. 90+% of the human beings on the planet you can handle business with. And that's just 1 year.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's just a year. And I think that I want to get back to what you talked about of the fatal flaw within parenting is, and I talked about this in another episode with a guy where I said with my friend Mark. So, he's going through some very, very difficult challenges health-wise. And he talked about how he's getting through all of that. And he said, what I was teaching my kids when they were younger was you can't be afraid to fail. And I think it's a fatal flaw when parents try to protect their children from failure, right? And protect their children
Huge mistake.
Because failure is it's a human part of life, but we just talked earlier about lobstering. It's when you fail that you have the chance to move forward. It's when you fail you have the chance to reflect. Very rarely do we reflect when we're successful.
Yeah.
Right? It's pretty rare. Right? Usually when we're successful at some capacity, it's a pat on the back. It's look, I worked really hard and yay for me, but there isn't necessarily oftentimes a reflection of how you got to where you got. When we fail, especially if we fail in spectacular or dramatic fashion, we see our failure in front of us. And for those, like you said, who are wanting to grow as people, they say, well, why did I do that? Why did I fail? What was the cause of that? Like what happened? And then the most important thing is, all right, well, what can I do better? How can I get better at this? I have to imagine that when you train in jiu-jitsu and you do this for 3 or 4 days a week, 3 or 4 weeks a month, 12 months a year, X number of years in a decade, several decades, I would think, and I guess it's a statement, but really it's more of a question, Bryce. Do you now create this practice of yourself of humility? Like you practice humbleness almost all the time when you get through this because there's more to know and learn?
Yeah, it's funny. So I had one time in business situation. because I've been the number one producer from a sales standpoint in most of the firms that I've ever joined. Right. And somebody asked, oh, what's Bryce's secret? And one of my other partners were like, supreme confidence. So I project a great deal of confidence, and I think you should walk through life with your, head high, shoulders back, busting through the doors, ready to engage in everything. Right.
That's what one of the things that Jordan Peterson says in, Ways of Living a Life, which I really love, is stand up straight.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's very important. And sometimes confidence can be confused with arrogance. And I've had people that have, hassled me because also I'm a jokester, comedian type, and some of my personal interactions. And so I'll joke like, hey, look, I play an arrogant guy on TV, but that's not where my heart's at. And it's not, right. I am at my core very humble. I do believe that God gave me tremendous blessings. I've really worked hard to play to my strengths and the things that He's given me, and mitigating my weaknesses. And I've got plenty, and I've made disasters of things in life. But yeah, when that around any corner, on a jiu-jitsu mat, even as I'm a 4th degree black belt, right? Which is,
congratulations, by the way. That's a tremendous achievement.
Yeah. I only say that to say that's, I think there's 700 of us in the country, right? And jiu-jitsu's been around, for a while now, right? And so to get to some of these levels, I mean, it's kind of a rarefied air as you climb up to that.
The pyramid is thin at the top.
It also means that I'm old, but I'm an OG gangster. I have crafty tricks too.
That's right.
But you have to kind of formulate a practice and an understanding and a humility that knows that, man, there's always somebody that could kick your ass, and you have to be okay with tapping out. You have to be okay with also, there's dudes and I mean, I'm blessed in that I don't get tapped very often. And even these 25-year-old phenoms and things like that, I'm crafty enough and skilled enough and been salty dog enough that I don't get got very often. Right. But there are times when I have murder in my heart because I'm given such a hard time. I'm like, get this shit off me. I can't even believe this guy's crushing, the life out of me like this. Now, I never show a pain face because we were taught that in the early days. They never know that they're getting me. They never know that I'm running for my life, but you have to have humility, and you have to carry that on in life, and you have to understand that life is a series of challenges that are coming at you, and at any minute, there are things that could threaten, anything and everything, and you have to boldly face that and face that without fear in life, and know that you're in the hands of a great God, and you have to know that you can get through anything. And jiu-jitsu does teach that. I know that I can get through anything in life.
Well, I think that is a remarkable lesson, and I can't adequately express how important that lesson is for everybody, right? That you can get through things in life. And we talked earlier about especially youngsters and succumbing, to, or avoiding failure, right? Or succumbing to adversity. Whereas moving through adversity is actually one of the most important things we can do as humans, because we were built to overcome adversity. We just were, right? That's how our brains have evolved. That's how we've gotten smarter. It's how we've gotten stronger. It was interesting you mentioned about the choice of tapping out or not. My friend Eric was saying that's actually an interesting moment where he described it on the mat, where you're compressed. It's super physical, right? It's intimate, physically intimate, because your face is in, people's armpits, and like your hands
and
are
other
everywhere,
things
right?
too, yeah.
And other things, right? Your hands are everywhere, right? So it's physically intimate, but there's a moment where you decide that you've had enough, and there's a humility that that happens at that moment where you can still try to fight to see if you can get through it. But now, and then there's a point when you know that you can't.
Yeah, well, and sometimes you really truly have no choice. I mean,
Right.
there's not that many times that I've gone unconscious, but I've been choked unconscious, enough times to know that the reality is sometimes, you're like, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And you fail no matter what, because it's not always just a positive outlook. It's not always just, grit. I can get through this. Sometimes, your body gives up, and it might be that, you have injuries in life. You have things that you cannot control. One of the ways that we started this question was we talked about being comfortable with the uncomfortable. Jiu-jitsu is one of those things that, like, I could pull you on the mat with me. I could put you down in a side control mount. I could squash you to the point where you cannot breathe, and just my pressure alone could probably tap you out. And no offense to Chris Foster, because I'm sure you're a tough guy.
No offense taken. I believe you.
Yeah, but I could put such pressure on you that one time, because you're brand new at it and you've never felt pressure like that. You've never felt that sort of like just lung compression. Fast forward a year, I could put all of that same pressure on you, everything, and you'd be able to endure. You develop this kind of overall body resilience and strength, and I talk about, I mean, the callus, your bones get harder because you're clashing, with each other. You're banging into each other. You're getting bruised up. You're getting your neck, just the skin of your neck gets tougher because, first few weeks and months of this, it's like
rashes on every single day.
What are all these bruises on you, And then you fast forward a couple of years.
But you get callous, right? You get stronger.
Your whole body just gets tougher. Your toes get stronger. I mean, that's the nice thing about jiu-jitsu and wrestling. Some of these things, it is a full body experience.
Yeah.
And that's why wrestlers and jiu-jitsu guys and MMA guys are, hands down the toughest athletes in the world. I can't think of anything else that combines all of that in the same way.
Yeah, no, and I think that is actually so good for us. I think that it's good for us as men to be physically challenged. I think it's good for us to go through toughness, and I'd love to kind of get back to one of the first things we talked about when your daughter asked, what you did for a living. Do you talk to her, and do you talk to your so you have a daughter? Do you have other children?
Yeah, I've got 3 girls, and I've got 2 older girls. Daughters as well. Yeah.
All right, so it's all girls. So I have 2 girls, right? So it's all girls. So I think that what I learned or thought about was, how I was going to be a model of manhood, but not for sons, but for daughters, right? How am I going to be a model of manhood for daughters? How am I going to show them the kind of man that they might hopefully look up to, right? And to think of a partner that would, be, both interesting and strong but tender and attentive and, purposeful, but, acknowledge weaknesses and all the stuff that, you hope that they think about when finding somebody. Do you tell them about your history of jiu-jitsu? Do you tell them about the things that you go through so they learn from your stories?
Oh, well, even better than that, all 3 of my girls have trained jiu-jitsu with me. All my girls have trained firearms with me. All of my girls Yeah, I think that part of that for both boys and girls is incredibly important. And I'll talk a little bit about females in jiu-jitsu. There is no other martial art that's more effective for women. And I've trained everything. Mm-hmm. I was part of a vocational training school for military vets. I taught combatives. I taught arrest control for police officers. I mean, all of that. There's nothing better for women as far as a martial art.
Interesting.
I would teach jiu-jitsu before anything else. And the reason is because for you are being told a lie in Krav Maga, which is one of those other things that's grown in popularity, or even Muay Thai, which is probably one of the more effective combat sports, and I endorse it. You're being told a lie if you're being told as a female that this will get you to be bulletproof kind of a thing, right? For women, if you are going to be fighting a man, and this is just the male-female difference, men are dramatically stronger than women. Some of the weaker men are still stronger than some of the strong women. Now, there are exceptions to all of these rules, but we're not talking about that. But a woman needs to learn techniques that allow them to make their way to escape. Jiu-jitsu is the only one that effectively does that. Jiu-jitsu is the only one from a technique standpoint that's really built and made for a smaller, weaker opponent. And that was Elio Gracie, who was small and, 140, 150 pounds and adapted, that judo-based jiu-jitsu to those street fights in Brazil. And he was a small guy and had to adapt because of that. And he made a beautiful sport that allowed a smaller opponent to win, allowed a smaller opponent to get out of things. Jiu-jitsu is the only thing, especially you got to think also on minimum effective dose, right?
Right.
Because maybe a 10-year Muay Thai chick can be effective, right? But we're talking about what can I take and what can I concentrate on for a little while to learn the skills to protect myself. Jiu-jitsu is the only thing.
So I have to imagine that it gives your girls a little bit more confidence.
For sure. It gives me confidence as a dad,
Sure.
I want my girls to, there's some nefarious people out there. There's some bad situations. Now, of course, you want to teach them self-awareness. You want to teach them vigilance. You want to teach them not to be stupid and putting themselves in situations that they're vulnerable in. And I believe that my girls are very strong in those ways and very sensible in those ways. But you want them to have the ability if, they're telling some dude, no, I'm out of here. And the guy's like, oh, come on, baby. And sometimes, there's idiots with, not the most evil of intentions, but they're ignoring the situation and, they're boneheads and knuckleheads and boys often are. I want my girls to be able to definitively be like, no, F you.
Right. This is done. And I think that the confidence of not only those, help taking care of themselves in those moments, but I also think too that because there's a discipline to the jiu-jitsu or any type of formalized training like that. There is a discipline. There is ways in which you learn. All of those things I think are really important as young people grow up. I think that they have to learn how to learn, and they have to learn how to devote themselves to a practice of some kind where they want to get better. They can see masters. They understand that they can move and progress. But it gives them focus and gives them purpose, right? And shows that they can grow and evolve in some type of form. I think that that's fantastic. Now, when you question for you, as you start, teaching those lessons, do you think about the kind of woman that you want them to grow up to be? Are they having those conversations with you?
Oh, yeah, certainly. I think there's a lot of things that are neglected around dinner tables and conversations with things. And so much of it, I would, and again, in light of Charlie Kirk's death and, some of my political persuasion and things like that, it doesn't matter where you are at on a political spectrum. And I'll qualify this in a moment. Because politics, by the way, its smallest and simplest definition is just how we organize ourselves, right? And that's how we organize society. And I think we should all have responsibility in that. But most people do not understand why they believe what they believe. They've never really thought about it. Most families take for granted and do not teach why they believe what they believe. Most dads, most moms, most households don't actually talk about it. Here's what our values are, and here's why we believe what we believe. Even those with, Christian households that are going to church on every Sundays and, we vote Republican or we vote Democrat and here's why, whatever. They don't really have discussions surrounding ideas. And you see that, by the way, evidenced in the like man on the street interviews, where people want to spit in the interviewer's face because they can't actually articulate why they believe what they believe. They've just been downloaded a narrative. And by the way, that happens on both sides. I want to be.
It happens with everybody, and I think that one of the things that is, I think, a great challenge, especially for young people now, is the way social media has, indoctrinated ways in which we think, right?
Yeah.
I think that young brains are so malleable, right? And when they're still forming, right? When they're 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, they're very impressionable, very malleable. And the ways in which the social media algorithms feed on the type of behavior, I think, is really, really dangerous for young minds. I think that young minds don't have a capability to process that.
Absolutely.
Right. And so we've been reading texts for about 5,000 years on papyrus and hieroglyphics and stuff like that. That's 200 plus generations, right? We've been on the interwebs for like 2 generations. Right. We're not ready for the stimuli that's coming through, and we still haven't progressed, and a young mind especially hasn't. And
and unfortunately, I mean, it is wrecking our brains because it's this short form 2 minute, and then it went to 1 minute, and then it's like 30 seconds.
30 seconds, and then it's 15 seconds, and then you see all these different things, and then suddenly there's an ad for this guy eating a pretzel, and then it's something else. And I think you're right when you talked about the family discussions at the dinner table. Is I think the ideas, the reason that I love what you talked about, where you talk about ideas and you talk about how you think, but really importantly, you talk about why you think. And I think one of the things that I've been reading recently, I don't know if you guys, this guy named Ryan Holiday, he
loves the Stoics. He's written a couple books. The Obstacle is the Way. Yeah.
The Obstacle is the Way. Exactly.
He's a friend of Tim Ferriss, and yeah.
Well, and what I like about what he was writing about was that people have a lot of misconception of what the Stoic philosophers did and what they are. And I am no means an expert. I'm just kind of developing a practice, and I'm thinking about it. But most importantly, I'm thinking about how I think about things, right? You think about how you think about it. Why do I think the way I think? And that's, I think, that is something that as you are teaching your children, as we teach your children, and as men teach other men, it's, I think, incumbent upon us, especially for younger generations, say, why do you think the way you think? And really think and ask yourself why you think what you think. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I think that that's something that all of us should be doing. It's dramatic though when it comes to your kids. Like I think you need to do that, but you need to do that for your kids.
For your kids, absolutely. Well, you are fantastic. This has been a wonderful conversation. We could talk for hours, and maybe come on again. I'd love to ask you more questions about stuff, but for this moment now, we can wrap it up. But I do have one question that I ask all my guests. Who is someone that you know that I don't know that I should know?
Gosh, that's a good question, because I probably know dozens of guys that I've been blessed that I have access to all. I mean, I don't know off the cuff of my head. Are you looking for an additional guest? Because
not even just a guest, but just somebody that after our conversation, you're like, Chris, you should talk to this guy, because I think you'd have a good conversation.
Oh shoot! I wish you asked me that ahead of time, because I think I probably could have come up with something good. But I will give you a guy that comes to mind: Shane Cashman.
Shane Cashman. Okay.
Yeah, Shane Cashman is a friend and a buddy of mine. He is one of Tim Pool's guys, so he's part of Timcast IRL, and he runs his own podcast, and he and I have had some of the best free form conversations I've ever had, and I just love the dude. He's a good guy. Shane is interesting and fun as a guest, and just a dynamic and thoughtful guy. He's the guy that got to jump on the plane and interview Kanye West, just like randomly. He's an exceptional writer. He was a English teacher before COVID shut things down, and he joined Tim's crew. And he's a great guy, and I'm blessed to have him as a friend.
Awesome. Shane Cashman. Well, Bryce Eddy, thank you so much for your time, and blessings to your family. And again, I'm very, very, very sorry for your personal loss this week.
Yeah, thank you for that.
And I hope that you and your friends can get through that with as much grace as you can.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Chris. All right. Thank you.
Have a great evening.
All right. Take care.
Well, oh my, Mr. Bryce Eddy. Wow. What an interesting story about someone who has practiced the art of being humble and resilient, yet then getting stronger and focusing on getting stronger in every way of his life. Right? Even looking at a mentor back in the day and saying, this is kind of who I might want to be, and overcoming the obstacles to get there, practicing his jiu-jitsu for decades. Can men be physically capable and even dangerous, yet be voluntarily in control? Can we be strong and humble? Can we strive to excel while embracing failure and discomfort? Can we learn and grow from stress? I think so. So what did we learn from Bryce? I think we learned from Bryce that the term hormesis, where small amounts of positive stress can unlock these adaptive response and growth and improves your health and resilience, and that's a good thing. I think we learned from Bryce that overcoming adversity is a good thing. And let's not lose that. Let's seek discomfort. Let's become more unstoppable in our own convictions. Let's be the man that we want to be. And everyone's going to be a different man. Everyone's going to be a different version of that man. Everyone's going to be their own man. But be the man that you want to be. Why not? It's your life. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. I hope you enjoy this podcast. And I'd love you to join the conversation. Visit menfolkjourneys.com and book a conversation, because I know you have a fantastic story to tell, whatever kind of man you are and whatever kind of man that you want to be. Thank you for listening. Word bid Falared.